In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, amen. Today is the third Sunday of the Holy 50 Days after the Feast of the Resurrection, and we read again, as we did during the Great Fast, the story of the Samaritan woman. And all of the stories that we read now in the Holy 50 Days that were repeated is to remember what is it that the Lord did and said before the resurrection, now in the light of the resurrection, so that as though the disciples are remembering and looking back at what is it that happened, and now having seen the crucifixion and the resurrection and having an understanding of God's intention from the beginning, having a greater insight and understanding into what everything he said and what did it mean and why is it that happened. And so the story of the Samaritan woman is the story of a woman who, after she believed in the Lord, she went and did the work of an evangelist, and she went to her town and she preached and she told the people, come see the man who told me everything that I ever did. And they came and they saw the Lord and they invited the Lord to their town, and many of them believed. And one of the things that the Lord said in this part of at the end, after the story of him speaking with the Samaritan woman, he says in verse 38, I sent you to reap that for which you have not labored. And he was speaking here to the apostles and telling them that you are reaping the labor of others. Others have labored, others have worked, others have preached, others have laid the foundation for the salvation of the world, and now you have come to you have come to reap that for which you have not labored. And it tells us something about how the work of God is beyond our time, beyond our generation, and it is something that has been going on for years and generations and centuries, and that the Lord is preparing and putting everything in place so that when the time is right, he can take an action and that he can reap the salvation of so many of the people. And he wanted the apostles to understand that even though, of course, they had a very important and great role in the church and the founding of the church, but there was so much that had been done prior even to them to prepare the people so that when the apostles go and they preach and they bring the people into the church, they are all ready to do so. So we can meditate on this verse, I sent you to reap that for which you have not labored, and try to understand what is the work of God? What is the work of God throughout all generations, and how difficult it is for us maybe to predict or to understand what is it that God is doing and planning. The first point to understand is that God's work is ancient and ongoing. In Ephesians 1 verse 4, it says, just as he chose us in him before the foundation of the world. It's revealing that even in the mind of God, before the creation of the world, God had in his mind who is it that he would be choosing to do the work of salvation. When Adam and Eve fell, of course, God knew that this was going to happen. And God already had the plan of salvation already set out from the very beginning. And again, the disciples here were reaping from centuries of prophecy and law and preparation. And God had begun this work even from before the creation. We read in the Garden of Eden after the fall, when the Lord is speaking to the serpent, and he says to the serpent that the seed of the woman, the seed here of the woman is referring to the Messiah. The seed of the woman is going to crush the head of the serpent, meaning that in the end, even though there will be a time where Satan has dominion and he is able to tempt the people and he is able to make them to fall, but there will be an ultimate victory of God, and that the Messiah, the Son of God, the seed of the woman, the person who is going to come from Eve, is going to crush the head of the serpent and defeat the forces of evil. And so here, this of course is the first time in the scripture, even in Genesis chapter 3, where the Lord even reveals this to us, that this is going to happen. But here he says, he just as he chose us in him before the foundation of the world, even before this, even before God created anything, it was in the mind of God, knowing what is it that was going to happen and planning ahead in order to do this work. So maybe when we look at a lot of the stories of the Old Testament and why is it that God did certain things that didn't make sense at the time, that now in the light of the resurrection we look back and we understand. Maybe one of the most famous stories of this is the slaying of Isaac, when after Abraham had waited for so many years for God to grant him a son, after he grants him a son, and that his son is now of age, he tells him, go and slaughter your son. Go and offer your son as a sacrifice. In the mind of Abraham, he could not have understood, what is the purpose of this? Why are you asking me to do this? But in his obedience, he followed what is it that God told him to do. and he went to offer his son as a sacrifice. And then, of course, Abraham, or God, stopped Abraham at the last minute from carrying it out. But there is a meaning that this slaying of Isaac is a representation of the crucifixion. That just as the son was offered on the cross, so also Isaac was offered as a sacrifice. So it's something that God has been preparing for and working on for so long, from the very beginning. The second point is that God uses many laborers across generations. St. Paul, when he was speaking to the church of Corinth, he said, I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the increase. So then neither he who plants is anything, nor he who waters, but God who gives the increase. So he's saying the work of God is not relying on a single person. The work of God, no matter how prominent they might be, no matter how holy they might be or righteous, no matter if they're miracle workers or famous preachers or apostles, whatever their rank, whatever they have done, the work of God depends on many people that have labored over many generations. And so we find ourselves as part of this. And we can ask ourselves, maybe I will never be an apostle. Maybe I will never go and preach in front of thousands of people or go and convert people in other nations or whatever the case might be. But each of us has a role in the work of salvation. Each of us has a role in whatever sphere of influence God has granted us, even if it is just our own family. How is it that we are responsible for the salvation of those people that are around us, to be a good model and a good example, and to teach them the truth and to live according to the precepts of God? All of this is actually part of the work of salvation for the world. We who have received from God what is it that is true are called to reflect this in our life, whether in words or deeds, or in whatever way is appropriate for the situation we're in and with the people that are in our lives, that this is the work of salvation that is carried on from the very beginning to the very end. It doesn't have to be done only with great deeds, with great and prominent and dramatic events, like maybe we read in the early church in the time of the apostles, but it can be done in simple things, in just showing kindness and showing love and being faithful in our own spiritual life and coming to church and teaching our children what is true and what is good and being submissive and willing to yield to one another and putting other people's interests before our own. These very simple things, right? These very simple things that we can do as a sign of our being the children of God. Also, God's work often unfolds beyond our lifetime. In Ecclesiastes 3:11, it says, no one can find out the work that God does from beginning to end. Meaning the plan of God is very difficult for us to understand. Maybe what we see is today. We see a slice of what is it that God is doing. And God is not revealing the next step. God is not revealing the next thing. He doesn't tell us what is going to happen tomorrow, even with the apostles. During the 3 years of the Lord's ministry, when the apostles were with him, only at the very, very end did they get a glimpse and understanding that the Lord was going to die. He did not reveal this from the beginning. Certainly when he called them, the fishermen, to be apostles, he didn't explain to them what is it they should expect. And he didn't tell them, oh, by the way, after this ministry is done, I'm going to die and also you are going to be martyred. Maybe if he had told them this, they would have rejected his call. If you went to them from the very beginning and you told them, if you come and follow me, you will be killed. How many of them from that kind of spiritually immature state that they were at the beginning, how many of them would have followed through? How many of us, maybe if we had a full picture of all of the trials we would experience in our life and whatever suffering we would experience, that this would be something that we could handle to hear from the very beginning. But instead, God builds us up gradually, day by day and year by year, in order to prepare us for whatever challenge is going to meet us in the coming days. And so the work of God unfolds, whether it unfolds in our life or unfolds in the church as a whole. Whatever it is that God is preparing for his people, it is unfolding over a long time. And again, as King Solomon said, no one can find out the work of God that God does from beginning to end. Also, St. Paul, when he was speaking about the heroes of faith from the Old Testament, all those who were great heroes of faith that remained obedient to God and accomplished great things, he says about them in Hebrews 11:13. He says, these all died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off, were assured of them, embraced them, and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. Many of those from the Old Testament who received the promise of the coming of the Messiah never saw the Messiah. Abraham was told that he would be the father of many nations and that his descendants would be like the sand of the seashore. He never saw this in his life. It's something that he believed and he was assured of that God would accomplish, but it happened only after him. So again, we are a part of the work of salvation, but this work of salvation unfolds over a long period of time. Maybe even when we are trying to serve someone. We are trying to bring someone who is going astray back to God again. And maybe we feel even after all of our efforts, after all of our time and attention that we have given to this person, that nothing has changed. They have not returned. They have not repented. But we don't realize that maybe we are just one part of a larger plan that God is working in the life of this person to return them again. I shouldn't be so mindful of what was the result, but more of what is the effort that I am putting and how is it that I'm fulfilling God's command and the work of salvation. The fourth point is that the work of salvation is God's and not ours, meaning God is the author of salvation. God is the one who seeks to return all those who are far from him back again to him. God is the one who planned and designed the world, and he is the one who created it. He is the one who created heaven and earth. God is the one who has done all of these things. We are simply playing our part in what is our role that God has granted us in the work of salvation, but we are not the authors of salvation. In Philippians 2:13 it says, "For it is God who works in you both to will and to do for his good pleasure." So even when we put in all of our effort, we are participating in the work of God. We are cooperating with God in what he has called us for, but we are the stewards and the messengers. We are not the authors. We are not the ones who know what is good for each person or how God is unfolding all the work of salvation, whether it be in our lives and the lives of our loved ones or in the church as a whole. It is according to the will of God, and we cannot take the place of God in this. If God calls us to preach, then we preach. If God calls us to show love and compassion and to serve, then we do so. If God calls us to be faithful in some area, we do so. But in the end, it is the work of God. It is the work of God, and we are simply participants. We are working with him, and we receive the blessing of this work, but we are not the ones who are designing it or architecting it. Also, God reveals only what we need to know. In Deuteronomy 29, it says, "The secret things belong to the Lord our God, but those things which are revealed belong to us and to our children forever, that we may do all the words of this law." We don't always understand why things happen, and God does not always reveal what is it that happens. Again, he tells us what is necessary for our mission, but he doesn't tell us everything. And again, we as human beings, if we were told everything, we likely will not respond well. We need to kind of be focused only on the things that matter, the things that are the immediate tasks in front of us, the things that we need to be doing today, rather than to be focusing on what is tomorrow. Even St. Anthony, when he was speaking about his spiritual life, he said, "Every day I begin anew." Every day is like a new day for him. He doesn't look at what happened yesterday, and he doesn't think about what will happen tomorrow. He says, what is my responsibility for today? What is God calling me to do today? And then by the end of the day, we look back at the day and we say, did I accomplish what God called me to do or not? Disconnected from everything that came before. We don't carry with us everything that came before. Instead, we just look at the day. Did I accomplish it? Did I do it? Was I pleasing to God in this day or not? God reveals to us only what we need for the day. And even when we ask God in the Lord's Prayer, we say, "Give us today our daily bread." We're asking God for our provision today. When God granted the manna to the Israelites, he gave them enough food for one day. He didn't give them food for a week in advance or a month in advance. He said, "No, I will provide for you everything you need every day. And so don't worry about tomorrow, because I will give you what you need in due time, in the right time." Trust that God gives us whatever that we need in due time, and he does not tell us what will come tomorrow. And sometimes our obsessions with tomorrow will make us forget to live today. We become so interested and so concerned about what tomorrow will bring that we forget that today is given to us, that God has granted us today to live. But instead of living it, we are so mindful only of and worried about maybe what happens tomorrow. The last point is that God rewards our faithfulness and not our results. In Matthew 25:23, it's the parable of the talents. the Lord gave different numbers of talents to the three servants. And to those two servants, that one of them he had given 5 talents and the other 2 talents, they both came back with different numbers. The one who had been given 5 talents produced 5 more. And the one who had been given 2 talents produced 2 more. And yet in both, he says, what? Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. He was rewarding the faithfulness of the servants for taking what they had been given by God and working with it, putting in an effort. He wasn't mindful with the quantity of how much they produced. It was more about, yes, I praise you because you have worked hard, because you have tried your best, you have done all that you can, you are faithful with what you have been given. And so we shouldn't again be mindful of the fruits of our labor. It is not the fruit of our labor that matters the most. It is whether we have done what is faithful in the eyes of God or not. For instance, you might have some parents that are very faithful in raising their children. They try so much to raise their children in the fear of God, in the church, to be good examples to them, to raise them in a good and balanced and loving way. And yet in the end, we find maybe those children, when they grow up, they make certain choices and decisions in their life that are contrary to all that they have been taught, because they have a free will and they can choose how is it they should live. I think the perfect example of this is the prodigal son. The prodigal son who lived in the house of a very good father. Actually, in this parable, the father represents God himself, so he is perfect. And yet this son who grew up in this perfect household and was given everything good in the right way, in the right time, chose to leave the father and to go and live their life their own way. And so just because the outcome of this was that the son chose a wrong lifestyle, he chose to live in a life of sin, this is not to blame the parent. This is not to blame the father here in this story. Instead, the father was faithful in what he was given. So just because we have been faithful doesn't mean that the outcome is going to be good. Doesn't mean that all of our effort and all of our labor is going to produce an outcome that we expect or that we want. But in the end, God doesn't judge us on the results. He doesn't look at the results and say, well, because you produced such and such and you produced this much fruit, then I will reward you. Actually, he is going to reward our faithfulness. Just as here in the parable of the talents, he's rewarding our faithfulness. Did we do what was right? Did we sacrifice in order to give? Did we serve those people God has called us to serve? Did we work diligently in the services God has called us for? Or did we ignore them? Were we like the lazy servant that didn't do anything with what God has given us? Or were we like the other 2 servants that worked faithfully with what they have been given, regardless of the amount that was the return? So today in this gospel reading, when we read the story of the Samaritan woman, and the Lord is speaking to the apostles, and he says to them that you are reaping the rewards of those who labored before you. That it was not you who labored in order to reap these rewards. Your success now in your preaching and your evangelism and establishing the church is not only on your shoulders. It's not only because of your work, but all of the work for thousands of years of the prophecies and the prophets, the law, all the work of God throughout all of history that has prepared the world for this moment. So also we look at the work of God in our lives and we see that God has been working and will continue to work, and we are participants and fellow workers with God, but we ask God to help us to be faithful in the things he has called us to do, and not to feel that in the end we are the owners of anything, but we are merely the stewards and the servants, and that God has called us to work, and glory be to God forever. Amen.